My name is Audi Matias, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Natural Sciences at SUNY Empire State College. On behalf of the State University of New York, SUNY Faculty Advisory Council on Teaching and Technology, also known as FACT2, Adaptive Learning Task Group, and the SUNY FACT2 Examining Pedagogy and Learning in Online Domains Task Group, the SUNY OER Services, SUNY's Center for Professional Development, and the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the second week of the SUNY Virtual Symposium on Adaptive Learning. For those of you who joined us last week, welcome back. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time today, welcome, and we are happy to see you here. So, a few things we need to cover before we start. I am pleased to learn and share that there are over 400 people registered for this event. And in order to accurately address questions and to provide appropriate individualized follow-up, I'm asking that you utilize the chat feature to pose questions rather than the raise a hand. There is a group of volunteers monitoring the chat for every session. And in some cases, your questions may be answered directly in the chat. If that's the case, we're going to go for that. The chat transcript will be reviewed after each week to ensure that all of the questions have been answered. This is important, to reduce the background noise for all. I am also asking that microphones remain muted unless otherwise noted. And this session, just like we did last week, will be recorded and will be made available on the SUNY Center for Professional Development YouTube channel. So if you haven't bookmarked that channel, you should. I would also like to acknowledge the vendor sponsors who will be joining us during this symposium: Lumen Learning, Realize It, Carnegie Mellon University's Open Learning Initiative, Cookbooks, and McGraw-Hill. Thanks to the support from our vendors, we will also be offering participants ongoing opportunities to win door prizes, along with the opportunity to donate that prize to a student scholarship at their campus. Participating in these opportunities is optional. No one is required to do so. Should you choose to participate, polling features will prompt you to do so. And you'll see it, there's going to be a slide at the end of the event in which you can participate in that poll. I also have the pleasure to actually announce the winners from last week winners. And I actually think I saw one of them already. I'm not sure about the other individual, but I guess I'm going to announce it. Joshua Conan from Hudson Valley Community College. Joshua, I believe you are, I saw you. You are present today again. And Stephanie Patterson from Stony Brook University. So the two of you won the gift card. I believe, if I remember correctly, it was $50, or you can donate it to a scholarship of your choice at your campus. So thank you for participating.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. You see, I know so, Joshua. Okay, so thinking more in terms of what we learned last week, there were four main important points. I think the first one we need to remember is that adaptive learning is a solution, not the solution, right? And also that adaptive learning provides a synchronous learning experience inside an asynchronous environment, which is very important, particularly now with all the transitions to remote learning. And using adaptive learning is an opportunity to teach and learn in new ways. We're always learning as educators. And the last one, perhaps also very important, faculty choosing adaptive learning platforms should also experience meaningful technological and pedagogical training. So I think those are important points to remember as we move along today, during the examples today and the future weeks. Next, I believe. There you go. Thank you, Mike. So today's agenda focuses mostly on the spotlight on faculty using adaptive learning coursework from two of our vendor sponsors, Lumen Learning and Realize It. And as you can see right now, we are doing the welcome orientation, and we're going to go right at it in a few minutes to meet faculty and Lumen Learning personnel that are going to spotlight how you can utilize their product, Waymaker, in adaptive learning. We're going to follow that just very similar to what we did last week with question and answer for that particular session. We'll have a short break, transition spot, and then we're going to continue with the faculty and vendor spotlight for Realize It, followed by questions and the closing remarks. All the presentations and interactions will take place in this Zoom meeting. So this week, we're not moving around. As a reminder, the chat feature is a great way to ask your questions either during the spotlight sessions or as part of the dedicated Q&A time after each spotlight. So we are right on track. And so without further ado, I just would like to introduce the first session, our first set of speakers. I would like now to welcome Josh Barron from Lumen Learning. Josh and John Kane, a faculty member at SUNY Oswego, are going to spotlight the use of Waymaker. Waymaker courseware combines open educational resources with evidence-based personalized learning tools, interactive learning activities, and analytics aimed at continuously improving learning term over term. That's pretty amazing in my opinion. Automated messaging tools save time for instructors, identify struggling students, and offering timely help and encouragement. So please help me welcome Josh and John, and we'll take it. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Why don't we just give me 1 second to share my screen. Let's see a second. There we go. One good thing about the rapid move to online is that everybody's probably been in my shoes here in the last couple of weeks and months of needing to share their screen here and having it not work. Hold on a second. There we go. All right, you guys able to see my screen now? Great. So first of all, I really want to thank everybody for taking the time to continue in the symposium and join us today. I think I was seeing there was over 100 folks in the session, and given the time of the year and what I know is a very, very challenging time for all of us, I really appreciate people taking time and engaging this way. And hopefully what we covered today will be of great value to you as you're thinking about the fall and getting ready for whatever that ends up being. So as Audie said, my name is Josh Barron. I'm the Executive Director for New York for Lumen Learning. And so wear many different hats, as I'm sure you guys do, in terms of both supporting individual faculty members, institutions, and then also part of the team working with the SUNY system on our partnership that I'll speak to in a minute. Let me ask John to introduce himself briefly here, and then I'll do a quick overview of what we're going to attempt to cover here in the 15 minutes or so. John, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm John Kane from SUNY Oswego. I was also the chair of the, co-chair of the Adaptive Learning Task Group.
Oh, John, you're skipping over so many other interesting and really great work that you do, but maybe we'll come back. Maybe I'll force you to introduce yourself a second time here as we go through. So I'm going to start off again with just a little bit of welcome, a little bit of background on Lumen and the work we've been doing and the SUNY partnership. Maybe I'll emphasize up front, if you're not aware of some of the benefits of that partnership, we do have a ready to adopt course catalog that SUNY is supporting that has all of the Lumen ready to adopt courses as well as those from Carnegie Mellon's Open Learning Initiative. And these are all at no cost for SUNY faculty, students, and staff to use. So we'll come back and look at that a little bit briefly at the end, make sure everybody knows where that is and how to use it. We're going to do a little bit of an experiment, and in the kind of vein of Lumen trying to be innovative in this marketplace and doing new things and having new models, we're going to have everybody go through kind of a self-guided tour of Waymaker to give you a chance to see it a little bit for yourselves. And we'll do that in kind of a guided way where I'll be prompting us with some questions in the chat room to try to make it a more active learning experience. So we'll see how that goes with 100 folks, but hopefully that will be a little bit more interesting than me just doing a kind of usual sales demo pitch. And then we'll turn it over to John, who's going to take most of the time to talk about his use of Waymaker in the economics courses that he's been teaching in the fall. And I've really encouraged John to kind of tell it like it is. So he'll go over the things that work, lessons learned, things he's planning to do in future semesters and so forth. I'm going to wrap up with a quick overview of some of the research findings that have come out of the national work we've done and also some local work in SUNY. If we don't have time for that, we'll just send out the slides. You can take a closer look at that. As I mentioned, we'll make sure people know where the Ready to Adopt catalog is. And then we should have about 10 minutes or so at the end for Q&A. But again, we're going to try to make this a little interactive as we go. So we'll be prompting for questions in the chat room throughout it. So a little bit about Lumen's background, if you're not familiar with us. Our mission is really focused around enabling unprecedented learning for all students. We do that by bringing together open educational resources, openly licensed content, along with really advanced analytic-based personalized learning or adaptive learning tools. So the idea is that the open educational content allows us to dramatically reduce costs. In this case for SUNY, there's no cost for students, while the technology allows us to significantly improve student learning, final course grades, completion rates, and so forth. And I think for anybody working in higher education, particularly the educational technology and adaptive learning space, this has been a huge challenge in higher education, meaning that when you tend to lower the cost of something, often the quality goes down. So to dramatically drop costs and improve outcomes is kind of a goal that I think we've had for many decades. And I'm really excited to be working at a place like Lumen where we're actually starting to see this and be able to do it at scale across the country. A little bit of background. We were founded in 2012 out of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation Next Generation Courseware Challenge Grant, which actually funded the development of the Waymaker courseware to begin with. We've been enhancing and further adapting and developing that platform for many years now, but it has that foundation in the Gates work. We have over 2,000 faculty members across more than 350 institutions currently using our courseware. We support a range of other courseware too, some of the math space, online homework manager, and you'll see that in the catalog once you go there. I think, we're super kind of proud of the fact that we've, again, been able to meet this goal of saving students significant amounts of money, over $30 million just in the last year. But again, in the context of also improving outcomes. And, as a kind of a side note, but I think a really important one, we have 75 million people, unique users around the world, using our content from our public catalog, the open content we put out there for the world to use. And again, as part of our mission of really helping improve learning for all students, we're really excited to see that kind of use as well. So last slide here, and then we'll move into our experimental interactive activity. A little bit about kind of our approach to our Waymaker adaptive courseware. As I think you probably heard David Wiley, our Chief Academic Officer, spoke to the keynote last week, all of our work is really evidence-based around learning design. So we use a lot of research-based methodologies to develop the course, put the content together. Every page is aligned with learning objectives. Every assessment item is aligned with its own learning objectives. We'll talk about that more as we go through, and you see it firsthand yourself. Everything is built for accessibility. So in terms of ADA guidelines, the need to make sure that things are fully accessible for students, things, all text for images, making sure screen reader technology can work, that's all just kind of baked in there, part of what we do all the time when we're putting the courses together. Seamlessly embeds with the learning management system, and I believe every SUNY institution has now been set up with the underlying technology to allow for this integration. So very quick and easy, in a couple minutes, literally 5 minutes, get a file imported into your learning management system, whether that's Blackboard, Canvas, Moodle, Desire to Learn, and the courseware is ready to go, ready for you to set up and start customizing. Do a lot of improvement work around the OER content, so making sure that we're constantly collecting data from use of the platform and using that data to inform a process to improve the materials. David spoke to that last time, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but happy to answer questions about that. And then a lot of our time and effort is really focused around helping faculty members both on technical work, but also on implementation to make sure that, you know, this is still a new technology for many folks, and making sure everybody understands the best practices. The research that we've done shows in terms of how to really impact on students, again, in ways that improve final course grades, completion rates, and so forth. I think John will talk to some of those types of tools and capabilities he's been using with Waymaker, and again, we'll answer some questions there. So I was going to pause if there's questions in the chat room, but I think others are monitoring those. So again, if things are confusing, you just need to get something quickly answered, do that in the chat room now. And if not, we're going to start off our first activity here. I'm not seeing any questions there. So anticipating a potentially large group, instead of trying to get you all accounts and sandboxes and get you into an actual course, we're going to use the self-guided walkthrough that we've developed at Lumen to help you kind of have an experience kind of exploring the Waymaker tools, both first from the student perspective and then from the faculty perspective. We'll give you about 10 or 15 minutes for this. And again, I'm going to put some prompting questions in the chat room as we go to both guide you a little bit, but hopefully stimulate some conversations as well. And thanks to Mike Daly, he's just put that URL for that clickable demo in the chat room. So if you want to click on that, actually doesn't look like that's clickable, so you might have to copy and paste that into your web browser to take a look at it. And I'm going to exit out of my slides here for a second to pull that up myself. And let me just put this in. There we go. Thanks, Mike, for putting a clickable link in there. So you should be able to click on that and bring up a new browser. And if you already get started, it should be pretty self-explanatory, but let me just guide you here a little bit if you need a little bit of explanation of how to use it. So you'll see here, there's two options here. I've just talked about Lumen Learning, so my guess is that you probably don't need that one. So why don't you go and click on the jump to the Waymaker portion of this. And again, as I mentioned, it's going to start you off with the student view. Couple little orientation notes. You'll see yellow light bulbs throughout the kind of clickable slides here. If you want to go a little deeper, see some extra stuff, click on that little light bulb. I will note that when you get to some of the content pages from the student perspective, the light bulb will allow you to see some of the triad activities, the self-checks, the embedded kind of interactive materials the students see. So you might want to click on the light bulb for sure when you start looking through the content pages there. I'll continue here, and then basically you're just going to keep clicking on the slides here, and each time you click, it's going to give you a little bit more information and kind of guide you through here. So with that, hopefully that was enough to get people started, and maybe you're already not paying attention to me because that's kind of the goal. So why don't you start looking through it, give you about 5 minutes here, and then I'm going to put some prompting questions in the chat. You're really sucked into what you're seeing, great, no problem. But maybe the prompting questions will give you some things to be thinking about. It would be great to hear from people in the chat room here in terms of answering some of those questions. And again, if you're confused, something's not working, put that in the chat and we'll jump right on that. And now, John, this is where I'm thinking we should have had some type of background music or something that we could
Yes.
play. Although nobody wants to hear me sing, but I don't know. Maybe Audie? No, you sure?
No.
Okay, so here I'm gonna. Yeah, great question. I think it's Stephanie. So what you're seeing right now is what Waymaker looks like within the Canvas learning management system. It will operate very, very similarly in Blackboard or Moodle, Desire to Learn. Waymaker is designed to integrate with the learning management system and not really be used by itself. And that's an intentional design strategy on our part. We don't want to spend time recreating grade books and discussion forum tools. Those are part of learning management systems. Almost every college has access to those. And so we prefer to focus on the adaptive courseware and the content, and then also the tight integration, the LMS, which I should mention includes integration with the gradebook. So when students go through a graded quiz that you'll see here in the click-through demo, those grades will automatically flow into the grade center in Blackboard or the gradebook in Canvas and so forth. Okay, I'm going to post a question here. I'll read it out too. What are students encouraged to do to master the content in Waymaker courses? And you'll probably have already seen there's a little Succeeding with Waymaker tutorial for students when they start using Waymaker at the beginning of the semester, and it speaks to that point there. Oh, great question about the Oscar standards in terms of Waymaker courses. So yes, it really very much complements and supports the Oscar rubric and the, which I think are just awesome standards, having worked in the distance education space for some time. There's actually a document that I believe has just recently been released, and Mike Daly might be able to point people to that, where we've kind of, as he said, kind of put a little matrix together so people can clearly see how well Waymaker is aligned with Oscar. Obviously, there's parts of Oscar that are up to an instructor, like what to put in your syllabus and things of that nature. But from an infrastructure and kind of design perspective, it's very complementary. Thanks, Mike, and I'm extra glad that we're checking to make sure it's fully accessible. Probably should have noted there is going to be a Blue Book final exam at the end of the session. So if you're kind of off checking your email, just heads up about that. Okay, let's put another question in here and see if we, whoops, sorry. Put that to one person. Let me see if I can get this out to everybody here. So you've probably started now to get through the show what you know pre-test. And so I'm curious if people see value in that, think your students would find that useful, the feedback they get useful. Anybody want to comment on that in the chat room maybe?
I have a comment, I guess. I think that's a really useful feature because it kind of help you understand where the students need a little bit more information. Is that part of that? I mean, that is feeding into the adaptive learning system, correct? Those little questions?
Yep, so there's kind of an analytics engine running behind the scenes, and it's collecting a lot of data, including that data, and that's what's used as people progress through. You're going to start seeing the faculty side of the platform, and you'll see things like a faculty dashboard where you can see which students are struggling in the course, and that's determined in part by that data that's being collected. And John will speak to that, I think, too, in a few minutes here on the Spotlight session. A couple questions coming in here. Let's see. So Stacy was asking about disadvantaged students without internet access. Great question. There is an EPUB version, so it's an ebook kind of format of the content for the course available for students to read offline if they don't have internet access at their homes, for example. I do like to stress that that's really a supplement to the Waymaker course. As you'll see in the click-through and hear from John, there's tons of really interactive material, simulations, practice activities, so forth, within Waymaker. Without internet access, students wouldn't be able to take advantage of that. They wouldn't be getting the personalized feedback. There's a range of things happening right now to try to make sure that students, in New York State have full internet access or have places to go with internet access. So that could be something we'd speak to here. Maureen, thanks. Yeah, I think the setup of the tiles, if you've gotten that part in the study plan, I think is particularly useful for online courses. It gives students a structured path through the materials. They can still navigate to wherever they want to go, but it really helps them see, okay, I got to start here, go here, 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 and have that kind of sequence of materials. Elizabeth, don't think the click-through actually brings you to an actual quiz. I think you would see the quiz option, but you're not going to get in and actually see quiz questions. So I don't think that's. And thanks, Ed Beck, who's been working a lot with us and doing great work at Oneana, has some first-hand experience with Waymaker, so thanks for that comment there. Carrie, awesome question about learning outcomes and accreditation. I'm watching the clock here too, so we have just about 3 or 4 minutes left, so I'll try to go through some of these fast, but yes, there's a lot of opportunities to use Waymaker data around accreditation purposes. So for example, we have the full set of the skill level, individual level learning objectives documented in a Google Sheet. What we have institutions sometimes do is align their program level objectives with those skill level objectives, and then even maybe institutional level accreditation level objectives. What that allows you to do is we can then run a report and send you data. You can see how your students are doing against the skill level learning objectives, but then roll that up to the program level as well, and then use that to report back to middle states and other accreditation bodies. And as far as I know, this is the first example of using hard data like this to really report back to accreditation bodies how students are performing against program level objectives. And so usually it's a more anecdotal kind of process, and I think accreditation bodies are really going to like that hard data. Some questions around adding content to Waymaker. A couple of ways of doing that. There's a lot of customization capabilities right within the platform. You can move tiles around, delete tiles. You can add anything you want to the learning management system. So again, this gives you a whole foundation of adaptive content to work with and tools, but then you can add your own Word documents, PDFs, whatever you might want to your course site within the LMS. And then there's also a new feature we're rolling out that allows folks to suggest changes to the actual specific text of the content, and then we run that through a peer review process, make sure subject matter experts have looked at it, and then assuming it kind of passes that, then we would add that to the course as it goes through its continuous improvement process. Lots of good questions here. I think I'm seeing people answering them as well.
Yeah, some Mike has been helping answering, and John too. Right. And the other thing is to remember that we'll have the chat transcript, and if anything you don't have time, right, we can definitely go back and try to answer it and send it by email.
So I'll hit this last one from Keith. Good to see you, Keith. Yes, so there are, and now others from Lumen I might embarrass myself with the wrong, but I believe we have 3 questions per learning objective. So in your question about how many questions might you get, it really depends on the learning objectives being covered by a particular quiz. But in general, I believe there's 3 questions per learning objective. These are randomly pulled from a pool to generate a randomly generalized quiz and so forth. So hopefully folks have benefited from this walkthrough. That's publicly available. You could go back to that whenever you want. As we wrap up, again, I'll show you where the courses are. You can get your own copies of these courses, get them set up in your own LMS. You can do a much deeper review of those. We also have sandboxes we can set you up if for some reason you don't have access to a blank course site right now. So with that, I think we're going to move on, and I'm going to stop sharing so John can take over here and speak specifically about his use of Waymaker in his economics courses And maybe I won't force you in the interest of time, John, to talk more about your background, but I'm sure people can Google you and find that out. So.
So I've been teaching economics for quite a while, sometime last century I started. I was never all that happy with how much students learned. And let me get control of this. Here we go. I started teaching online in 1997. And one of the first things I did there was to look at learning outcomes in my online class and compare it to the face-to-face one. And I realized just how badly they were doing in both. So one of the things I did is I had done some reading on the benefits of retrieval practice and other evidence-based practices. So I created my own mastery learning system. I adopted relatively low-cost textbooks. And then when we moved to Blackboard, all the links to the about 8,000 questions I had created, all of the images broke, and I did rebuild them, and then they broke again. And then I switched to a publisher-provided platform. But I wanted to do something that would be a little bit less expensive. I wanted to use OER, but the OER resources available at the time did not generally provide the type of adaptive learning or personalized learning that's available with, that's now available in Waymaker. So in the fall of 2019, I adopted Waymaker. I used it in 2 classes, one with about 300 students in a face-to-face environment, one with 40 students online. There was a number of reasons why I did it. One of the main reasons was that it was free. The system I was using was a McGraw-Hill product, which worked pretty well, but it was expensive. Even though students had first day access, they still had to pay for it. It was done with a course fee. And there was a lot to be said for the free resource. And I also evaluated Waymaker, the Waymaker economics package, and the quality of the content was quite good. It's based on OER content that's gone through 2 editions. The Waymaker economics package has gone through 2 major revisions as well as regular updates. And what I really liked about it is that everything in Waymaker is designed using a backwards design process, where they come up with a set of learning objectives, generally based on a panel of experts in the field, and they provide very explicit and transparent alignment between the learning objectives, which are clearly stated to students, and all the activities and all the assessments. So students understand what they need to do and why they're doing it, and it makes it really obvious why everything is being done. I also like the fact, and one of the reasons I switched to Waymaker was that I went to a presentation done by Steve Greenlaw, who's the author of both, a major author of both the OER content that this is based on, as well as a major developer of the Waymaker materials, where he presented with David Wiley on the process that's used at Waymaker to update the process. As was just noted, that there's a lot of people using this, and there's a lot of data being generated, which is used to find what are the choke points, where things break down, where students spend a lot of time but are still not being very successful. And that's used to update the material in ways that happens to some extent with publisher work, but the process tends to be a little slower. And I also really liked a lot of the design factors in Waymaker. That why it matters thing, which begins every section, tells students why what they're learning in this module is important. That type of thing provides a little bit more intrinsic motivation. It tries to make some connections between students' lives and their expected future careers and why they're learning this material with each and every module. And that show what you know thing not only provides a system with some feedback and provides students feedback on what they learned, there's also a tremendous amount of research that shows that testing people on things they have not yet learned tends to prime their learning. It makes some people much more receptive to learning. So it tends to deepen the learning later, because essentially what you're doing is you're showing people these are things that may be important and you don't yet fully master them. And it gives people feedback, which provides a nice environment to start the learning. And all the material in there there's a lot of interactive content that provides students with that continuous feedback. That was that synchronous component that was mentioned a bit earlier, that the student is working synchronously with the package and is getting feedback immediately on how they're doing. And another nice thing about the Waymaker packages is that they provide, from a UDL perspective, multiple means of engagement. There is text descriptions, there's videos, generally very high quality videos. In the economics ones, some of them are based on the crash course videos, as well as a variety of other really good videos that have been carefully collated and integrated into the text, as well as the interactive content that gives students plenty of time to practice. And one of the other things it does is it provides lots of examples or lots of practice with retrieval. And we talked about, David Wiley talked about this a little bit last week, but one of the things that we've known for over a century is that one of the most effective ways of having long-term recall is practicing retrieval. And basically students are given as much time as they need to interact with the materials and to try to test their knowledge and engage with the materials and get feedback on whether they actually have mastered the content. And that type of retrieval practice is really useful, and the Waymaker package provides a lot of it. The other thing I like about it, which is a bit different than the adaptive learning platforms, is that instead of having the computer direct students through a very fixed structure, it gives students feedback on how much they've learned. And if you work through the material that was just shared with you, you can see that when students master material, the color of those little tiles change so that they can see what they've mastered and what areas they still need practice on. And if they try to take the test at the end and they don't do well, they get some feedback saying, you know, you didn't do very well on this, but you didn't go back and work through the practice materials on this, and you haven't yet attained mastery. And it's giving that sort of feedback, which is really helpful. There were some things that you may have seen in the materials that was shared with you, but one of the nice things about the Waymaker package is that you can set up as an option automated messaging to students, which gives students feedback on how they're doing, particularly when they get to the quizzes at the end. And that's all automated. You get to customize it. You get a few variations of emails or email notes to students who did well or for students who are struggling, and you can customize it and put it in your own words. But one of the things that happened with that is, because it seems to be coming from me, it is in a sense coming from the instructor. When students respond to it, it goes back to the instructor. And in the class with 300 students, I was getting hundreds of emails a week. Sometimes students were just saying, yeah, I know I rushed through this. I didn't spend enough time. I'm going to go back and work on it a bit more. And it was really impressive to see the increase in the level of engagement that students have. Even though I had told them that the emails were automated, they were still responding to me as if I had personally sent each and every one of those hundreds of emails. And it created a bit of, especially in the large class, more communications and more connection to students than typically has occurred in the previous few decades when I've been teaching large classes. So I was really impressed by that. And the other thing is that when I've adopted new textbooks, especially with the test banks and so forth, there's always some sloppiness there. They're often done by people who are grad students who may not always have that much experience writing questions. I was really impressed by the quality of the questions and the content within Waymaker. I found a few minor problems. I sent a note back, and they were generally corrected that day, which was really impressive. So I was impressed by how responsive the Lumen Learning was in terms of creating or improving the package and making corrections to minor wording issues and questions or content very, very quickly.
Michelle, I'll just quickly jump in and say that that's one of many powers of openly licensed content. And I think, you know, we try to leverage that to make those improvements quickly. So great that you pointed that out.
And when the change is made, it automatically pushed out to everybody. So if you see a problem with something that was just introduced, it can be fixed before anyone else has to deal with it. And when you have 300 students, those problems show up really quickly. And there were many fewer of those than I've had with other textbooks. But there's some things that any adaptive or personalized learning platform can't do. That it's designed basically to replace a textbook and to give students this one-on-one interaction with a computer, but it doesn't provide the types of classroom community or that type of sense of engagement with peers that we'd like to provide, and that's effective in creating more learning in our classes. So we have to build that in somehow. We want to provide some way for students to interact with each other and to teach each other and to learn from each other, because there's a lot of benefits from that. But that's not something specific to Waymaker. That's true with any textbook or any publisher-provided platform. So Waymaker basically replaces a textbook and the types of ancillaries that a publisher would provide, but we still have to build a course that provides these other avenues. And one of the things I'd like people to think about a little bit, and perhaps suggest some things in chat, is what can we do to supplement this to provide those types of activities? I can talk very briefly about some of the things I've done, but that's something that I think could be helpful, especially if many of us will be teaching for some or all of the fall remote environment. That building that sense of community and that sense of connection is really important. So we have to make sure that we provide that whatever platform we're using. So in the fall, there were a couple of issues. One was that I found, and this was true with publisher materials too, but pretty much every question that was available in the assessments or any of the self-tests and so forth had been posted on Chegg as well as several other platforms with answers. Some of the answers were incorrect. The very first day of class, I had a student come to me and say they got a question mark wrong when they picked a correct answer, and they showed me that they had looked it up on Chegg. So that's something, though, that Lumen Learning has been working on. And Josh, would you like to step in and refer to that?
Yeah, and you know, I appreciate you actually bringing this forward, John, because I think it's a really good example of why all of us at Lumen who've been educators and came out of higher ed take this stuff super seriously. And so as soon as we saw and heard that this thing was happening, we had our data scientists create an API that will automatically search the web and immediately identify basically as soon as a question might surface someplace. And then our legal team issues cease and desist letters immediately to those companies. And as far as we were chatting earlier, I believe they're no longer there on Chegg as a result of that. Somewhat like accessibility, this is a moving target. I think anybody that stands up to say you'll never ever find this ever happening is probably, it's just not realistic. But I think it's a good example of us immediately responding to something that's important and you know, addressing it. Sure somebody else will figure out another way of doing these things, but you know, we're really committed to making sure we're on top of this stuff immediately.
And again, that's an issue that we all should be aware of, particularly if we're going to be moving to some online quizzing. And this was even true for the items that had no stakes. So I would suggest that if you're using online quizzing, you keep the stakes really low, which would at least reduce the incentives for that. And one other thing we should be considering, and this could be a nice thing again for the chat. I see Keith had posted something in there, but we should all look at, if we're going to be doing online quizzing or online testing, maybe we should be looking at some alternative assessments, and perhaps people could share some of their practices there. But one issue is when you're teaching large classes, there's always an issue about dealing with scale. You know, for many intro classes, multiple choice large exams were the norm. That doesn't work very well in an online environment. So let me just tell you a little bit about what I did to supplement this in the past. In my face-to-face class, I use a flipped class framework with just-in-time teaching, where students work through the material here in Waymaker, and then in class, I gave them some higher-level questions. Typically, they were using clickers, where there was a two-stage polling. I'd ask a question that would be challenging, that they'd struggle with. They'd vote on it first, and then they'd discuss it with, then I'd have them discuss it with other people, and then have them vote again. That's a method developed by Eric Mazur, and it's been shown to result in some fairly dramatic learning gains. It's one of the things I'd like to be able to do online or in a remote format. There is no perfect ways of doing it there, but there are some options. I also did have in-class midterm and final exams. They weren't terribly high stakes, but they were face-to-face exams. The online class was a pretty easy transition in the spring. I had 2 weekly discussion forums, one based on the content and other based on improving student metacognition and sharing thoughts and learnings, and then basically learning strategies and what they were doing to become more effective and the challenges they were facing, which worked really well. Each week they had a weekly written assignment or a quiz. And I also had them do a podcast project where students were able to either individually or in pairs create podcasts. And that they really enjoyed, although they were a little scared about it at first. They created some really nice projects. This fall, my plans right now is for the large class, because of the scale, it will be a synchronous class with an asynchronous option. I'm going to still try to do a flipped class type of arrangement, but instead, and I'm also going to be supplementing that with pack-back discussions to provide a little bit more activities that can work there. One of the things I will be doing, perhaps, is doing some polling in Zoom where they'll be asked the same types of questions they use clickers with. They'll be sent into small breakout rooms with 2 or 3 students to discuss it, and then come back and be polled again. And I'm also working with, or starting to develop, some plate videos that can have edited questions that can be an alternative for people who may not be able to attend the synchronous meetings. And instead of having higher stakes exams, there'll be multiple low stakes exams and perhaps some open pedagogy projects. But the question is, it's going to be a little challenging to do that in a class with potentially 300 to 400 students. The online class is going to continue in pretty much the same way, with the exception of anything I develop in terms of additional videos for the face-to-face class will also be shared with the online class. And that's pretty much what I've done, and that's pretty much all I've got. So we're open for some questions, and I'll stop sharing.
That's perfect timing. You have 3 more minutes.
So maybe what I'll do while people put their questions in there is I'll quickly show some of the research and the catalog. That should take us through the last 3 minutes, and then do that really great chat there around open pedagogy and having students actually contribute. So I'd love to continue that conversation here if there's interest. So I think David I think he showed some of these slides last week, so I'll do this very quickly, but I kind of like to put my money where my mouth is and make sure I show you the research findings that I was referencing earlier. So this is from the early Gates project that we worked on to first develop Waymaker. It measures course throughput, which is a measure of how many students start the course, make it through the drop-add period, and they get a C or better in the course. So it's a kind of a completion rate measure. You can see almost a 20% difference between the control group, which is actually using a combination of static OER, print OER materials, and traditional textbooks, versus the Waymaker population. So that's, I think, a particularly powerful finding. To kind of supplement that with a more local study, this was done by Tori Matthews at Monroe Community College. You may have seen him speak about some of his work with Waymaker and OER for quite some time. And so obviously a smaller sample size, but he's seen very similar trends within his biology courses there at Monroe. Happy to connect people to him if you would like to chat more with him. I know that David hit this one, so I'll maybe skip over it, but a summary here is that we're finding that the impact on student learning occurs with low-income students just as much as with wealthier peers, which is really important in terms of making sure everybody gets benefits from the technology. This last one, which is a really new study that I think David may have alluded to, we just finished this in the fall, and this is from data from Erie Community College, which has been using Waymaker maybe for one of the longest institutions in the SUNY system. And the summary here is we looked at 3 categories of students. The first category we're using, again, static print OER text. So great, saves money. But what we found was that it wasn't impacting on student learning. So final grades weren't changing, completion rates weren't changing. But again, good finding because they were still saving a lot of money. The second category was students who were using Waymaker, but not all of the capabilities. So not using the messaging tools, for example. There we saw a trend towards improving student learning, but it wasn't statistically significant. When you then add in these messaging tools and the other capabilities of the platform, so you're really taking advantage of all the adaptive tools, you see upwards of a half a letter grade improvement in final course grades, and that was a statistically significant finding. And so again, this really shows us that, you know, combining that open content with these adaptive tools really allows you to reduce or eliminate costs, in this case for SUNY, and, you know, significantly improve learning, which has huge implications, not just for the students, but for education and systems in general. Last slide, I'll just leave this up maybe as we're getting questions in the chat room. If you haven't already been there, the Ready to Adapt course catalog, where you can see all of the Waymaker courses that are available, along with Carnegie Mellon's Open Learning Initiative courses and others, is at oer.suny.edu. I can show how to find courses there if there's interest when you just ask that question in the chat. But basically, you're just going to be able to kind of filter out the courses, look at the ones your subject area interested in, and then there's a you can view all the content. There's a View This Content button, and then there's a Try This Course button in the upper right, sidebar box, and that allows you to request your own copy of the course, get that out to you in about a day, import that in your learning management system, and then you can start looking at stuff or actually start using it and getting it ready for use. With that, let's see what kind of questions are here.
I don't remember if you were able to cover all the questions before, and perhaps you want to go back if you didn't answer any of the other ones. I don't remember what we were.
Yes, there was, I mean, people have seen it. Hypothesis is an annotation tool that's quite popular and used heavily. Well, it's used often, and it's not something that's we've got working yet, but I just happened to be speaking with them last week, and we have some calls coming up, so we'll keep people posted about that.
Josh, there was a question from Stephanie about the amount of time faculty members can expect to set up a Waymaker course. It was answered in the chat. We might want to bring it forward.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, it probably varies a little bit on what you want to customize and put together. I would say kind of the basic setup and customization should take a half hour to an hour, and that really involves retitling folders, maybe reorganizing some of the content, and then also doing things like setting up your messaging tools. The messaging tools are highly customizable, so if there's templated messages, but you might want to change it so it sounds more like yourself, or how you might position something and things like that. So doing all that work, probably a half hour to an hour to get that kind of set up. We do have implementation support. We're happy to go through that with people, answer questions, walk you through it, kind of thing. You know, if you wanted to kind of create a whole bunch of your own content and add it and, you know, use all the bells and whistles in your learning management system, obviously that could take some more time, but the basic setup and configuration process is pretty quick. John can speak to some of that too, probably.
Yeah, basically it just comes out as a Blackboard cartridge if you're using Blackboard, and you can, if you want to use it as is, it just shows up as a series of modules, and then you add whatever you want to it around it. But you can customize it, and how long it takes depends on to what extent you want to remove things or shift them around, but that would be true with any type of platform, I think.
Another question about adopting just some of the modules. So you can remove any modules you don't want. So you could take the econ course, the microeconomics course, and maybe you don't cover supply and demand, and so you could remove that one. John might have a heart attack there, but so yeah, you could kind of pick and choose if you want. There's also some courses that are kind of co-rec courses. One of them actually is coming out today for English comp, and that intentionally has like additional modules that are designed for more remediation and so forth. And so there's kind of the flip I'm getting at. You can either remove modules, or some courses have extra modules in it too. So you can have students who might need some extra help have, like, you know, an area in the course to go over to get that kind of help a little bit more on their own. I've seen a couple questions around, you know, I'm not seeing my subject area, nursing, allied health sciences, in the catalog. Just to clarify, all the courses, I think it was 125, my last count, all are originally get funded out of groups like Gates and the Hewlett Foundation, and they've tended to focus on the biggest impact they can have on students, which is obviously great, but therefore they tended to focus a lot of that development effort on general education, higher enrollment courses. So that's what you'll tend to find in the catalog. There is a contact button on the catalog, and SUNY OER Services is always happy to help people find additional materials that are maybe more individual kind of content. Mike, Tony could speak to that, so you can reach out to them if you're not finding something and want help finding some other content. It won't be a full course per se, but it'll probably be useful materials. Mike, if there's anyone, I'm looking through the chat. If there's ones that you want me to answer specifically, or John, obviously, let us know.
Some comments about nursing and allied health course content, Josh. We've answered those in the chat. Allison has a question about planning to add more subjects. So if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, so part of our partnership with SUNY involves developing new courses. I think the Spanish course, Spanish 1 and 2 are a great example. They came out this year. A lot of the subject matter experts for that course were based at SUNY Oneonta, and we're working with Ed Beck and others there to help build that course out. So each year we go through a process of basically listening to SUNY faculty members. Mike and Tony do this a lot, and then work to prioritize what to build. And the next ones that are currently under development right now are public speaking, which will be available as a Waymaker course in, I believe, December. Someone could check me on that. And then we're also working on Accounting 1 or 2, which is the largest, most complex courses that we've built. There's a lot of technology that needs to go into those to do assessments of ledgers and assessment questions on those kinds of things. Accounting 1, I believe, is coming out in November, and Accounting 2 would be in May of 2021. We're in the process of identifying the next round, so Mike or Tony, you could speak to how best to do that, but I imagine maybe the contact button would be a way for people to let folks know about what's interesting.
That's great to know. I vote for anything natural disasters or hazards to be there too. That's just me. We have a few more minutes before we take, and we do have like a 5-minute buffer zone before we transition to the next. But I know if there's some pressing questions left.
I'm not sure which ones of these have been answered because people are still typing, but I do see things about support and so forth. So there's a range of formal and informal support. So we do a lot of webinars. People can just reach out. We can schedule. I think it was just yesterday, I guess it was, that we did a virtual workshop for SUNY Orange. I shouldn't say we, this was SUNY OER Services, but a number of us were there to support breakout groups and things like that. So we can do that kind of formal training. And then we're also always available for kind of one-on-one consultation. So myself and Laura Murray, who's our implementation solution director, who's not with us today, is also available to folks. She has a Calendly system. You can just set up a time with her kind of whenever works for you. So there's a range of different kind of faculty support mechanisms that are available. If it wasn't mentioned already, the SUNY help desk has been trained on support as well. So if you're at an institution, a Blackboard institution, and you're used to calling the SUNY help desk for support, you can call them and ask them for questions related to Waymaker, and they're ready to adopt courses. If they can't answer them directly, they route those over to us or to OLI. So I think that's just another benefit of the tight partnership we have.
And thank you for putting the information, Mike and Tony, related to the SUNY faculty, the Lumen circles, and the help desk for SUNY OER services. So if anyone, need that information, copy it now. Don't lose it. Any other last minute question? Josh and John, would you like to make one final remark?
Thank you. If you have any questions, please contact us.
Yeah, I'll put my email in the chat room, and I'll put that there. Audrey, I guess the one thing I'm going to complain about is that when you announced that Josh won the prize, I got very excited, and then there was a different Josh. I'm just joking. But thanks, I really appreciate everybody's time. I really appreciate APLU and everybody else who's worked on organizing this. Obviously, it's been a challenging time with COVID, so this really, I know there's been a lot of behind-the-scenes effort going into this. I really appreciate that as well.
Well, thank you very much to our first set of speakers, and round of applause. We did build a 5-minute break in case anyone needs to run. Short little break while we set up for the next round of speakers. So if anyone needs that short break, next speaker start at 3:05. Oh, wait, no.